The usually bustling courtroom 7B fell into a hushed silence as 7-year-old Sarah Matthews stepped through the heavy doors, her small hand wrapped around a worn teddy bear named Mr. Whiskers, her patent leather shoes clicking against the marble floor like tiny hammers. In the deathly quiet room, her mother Rebecca fought back tears, while her father James Matthews, the city's most prominent real estate developer, straightened his Italian silk tie with manicured fingers. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall Victorian windows cast long shadows across the wooden benches where spectators and reporters sat shoulder to shoulder, their breaths collectively held as the little girl made her way forward. Sarah had spent the morning practicing her walk with the child advocate in the courthouse hallway, determined not to trip over her new dress, a powder blue creation her mother had saved 3 months to buy specifically for this day. The dress matched her eyes exactly the same shade as her father's, a detail that made Rebecca Matthews' heart ache every time she looked at her daughter. The genetic reminder of the man who had once been the center of their world now sat at the defense table, his presence commanding attention even in silence. The gallery whispered among themselves as Sarah passed by. Some recognized her from the society pages, where James Matthews had once proudly displayed his perfect family at charity galas, and polo matches. Her face had graced the covers of local magazines alongside her father when he announced his latest development project just 6 months ago. Back then her smile had been genuine. Now her lips trembled slightly as she clutched Mr. Whiskers closer to her chest. The teddy bear had been a gift from her father on her 4th birthday, before everything changed, before the late-night phone calls and mysterious meetings, before her mother started finding unexplained cash in her father's study, before the shouting started. Judge Eleanor Wilson watched the procession from her elevated bench, her 30 years of family court experience evident in the way she leaned forward slightly, her eyes missing nothing, as the child advocate Ennis Peterson gently guided Sarah toward the witness stand. Unlike most children who appeared before her, Sarah walked with an unusual determination, each step measured and purposeful, as if she carried a weight far beyond her years on her small shoulders. Her Mary Jane shoes perfectly polished, and her white ankle socks pristinely folded, just the way her father had always insisted everything in their lives be perfect. Rebecca Matthews sat behind the prosecutor's table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She wore her best outfit, a 3-year-old navy blue suit shed purchased for job interviews after filing for divorce. The contrast between her attire and her ex-husband's bespoke wardrobe spoke volumes about the financial disparity that had emerged since their separation. While James, youngest partner at Matthews Morrison Development, commanded the room's attention with his powerful presence, Rebecca had spent the last 8 months working 2 jobs to maintain some semblance of normalcy for Sarah. The courtroom itself seemed to hold its breath as Sarah approached the witness stand, its dark wood panels and brass fixtures reflecting the gravity of the moment. Even the usual creaks and groans of the old courthouse had fallen silent, as if the building itself understood the weight of what was about to unfold. The American flag behind the judge's bench stirred slightly in the air-conditioning breeze, its movement drawing Sarah's attention, momentarily reminding her of the many flags she'd once waved at her father's groundbreaking ceremonies. James Matthews watched his daughter advance, his face a masterpiece of controlled emotion. Decades of business negotiations had taught him how to maintain a neutral expression, but those who knew him well could see the slight tension in his jaw, the barely perceptible tapping of his index finger against the rich mahogany defense table. His attorney, Jonathan Pierce, Esquire, of the prestigious Pierce and Holdsworth firm, sat beside him reviewing notes on his leather-bound legal pad, though his eyes kept darting between his client and the small figure making her way to the front of the courtroom. The child advocate, Ennis Peterson, a veteran of countless custody battles, had never seen a child quite like Sarah in her 15 years of practice. Most children had to be coaxed toward the witness stand, many crying or trying to run back to their parents, but Sarah moved forward with the kind of resolution that seemed beyond her years, her small hand maintaining its firm grip on Mr. Whiskers, while her other hand smoothed down her dress exactly the way she'd seen her mother do countless times before important meetings. Judge Eleanor Wilson, known throughout the state as the Iron Lady of Family Court, watched the child climb onto the witness stand, her experienced eyes catching every subtle movement as Sarah clutched her whiskers closer, her dark curls barely visible above the wooden panel. The child advocate, Ennis Peterson, placed a small step stool under Sarah's dangling feet, while James Matthews drummed his fingers methodically against the defense table, creating a rhythm that matched the ticking courtroom clock. The seasoned judge had presided over thousands of custody battles in her 27-year career, but something about this case had kept her awake the previous night, reviewing case files until dawn. The morning light filtering through the courthouse windows cast a halo around Sarah's small frame, making her appear even more vulnerable against the imposing backdrop of the justice system. Judge Wilson adjusted her reading glasses, noting how the child mirrored her father's posture, straight-backed and chin lifted, even as her tiny fingers warded the worn fur of her teddy bear. In her 3 decades on the bench, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to read body language, and the subtle discord between Sarah's rigid posture and nervous fidgeting set off warning bells in her mind. James Matthews kept his eyes fixed on his daughter, his expression carefully neutral, but Judge Wilson caught the slight twitch in his jaw whenever Sarah shifted in her seat. His attorney, Jonathan Pierce, busied himself arranging and rearranging documents on the defense table, his Mont Blanc pen clicking open and closed in an irregular pattern that drew several sharp glances from his client. The tension between them was palpable, even from the bench, speaking volumes about the strain this case was putting on even their professional relationship. The gallery behind the attorneys had filled to capacity. News of the Matthews custody battle had drawn curious onlookers from across the city, most of them familiar with James Matthews' reputation as both a business mogul and philanthropist. Local reporters occupied the back row, their court-approved tablets ready to capture every moment. Judge Wilson recognized Susan Chen from the City Tribune, the reporter who had first broken the story about irregularities in Matthews Morrison Development's financial records 6 months ago, her presence adding another layer of complexity to the already charged atmosphere. Rebecca Matthews sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, but Judge Wilson noticed how she leaned forward almost imperceptibly whenever Sarah moved, as if some invisible thread connected mother and child. The contrast between her faded navy suit and her ex-husband's tailored ensemble seemed to physically divide the courtroom into 2 worlds, one of privilege and power, the other of quiet dignity and determination. It reminded the judge of her own parents' divorce 4 decades ago, a memory that had partially inspired her career choice. Ennis Peterson, the child advocate, moved with practiced ease as she adjusted the microphone to Sarah's height, her actions deliberate and smooth, designed to put the child at ease. But Judge Wilson noticed how her eyes darted briefly toward the federal marshals positioned discreetly near the courtroom exits, their presence, unusual for a family court proceeding, but insisted upon by parties whose names had been redacted from the official documentation the judge had reviewed last night. The antique clock on the wall continued its steady march forward, its ornate hands moving with quiet precision, while Sarah arranged Ms. Whiskers on her lap, positioning the teddy bear so it faced the judge, a small detail that didn't escape Judge Wilson's attention. Children often revealed more through their unconscious actions than their words, and Sarah Matthews, despite her young age, demonstrated an awareness of her surroundings that seemed both remarkable and somehow troubling. Court reporter Marian Hayes' fingers hovered over her stenotype machine, her 30 years of experience evident in her relaxed posture, even as the weight of the upcoming testimony pressed down on everyone in the room. Judge Wilson had specifically requested Hayes for this case, knowing her reputation for maintaining absolute accuracy even in the most challenging circumstances. The entire courtroom seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the first question to break the heavy silence that had settled over them like a heavy blanket. From her elevated position, Judge Wilson could observe every subtle interaction, the way James Matthews' lawyer kept glancing at his phone, though all electronic devices were supposed to be silenced. The slight tremor in Rebecca Matthews' hands as she reached for her water glass, the almost imperceptible nod exchanged between two men in the gallery who Judge Wilson recognized as federal agents, though they were dressed in civilian clothes. All these details filed themselves away in her mind as she prepared to hear testimony that she suspected would change far more lives than just those of the Matthews family. The questioning began with Ms. Peterson crouching down to Sarah's eye level, asking about her favorite cartoon show Butterfly Princess, making the child smile for the first time since entering the courtroom. But when the topic shifted to weekend visits with her father, Sarah began twisting Miss Whiskers' ears the way she always did when she was scared. Her mother noticed immediately, having seen this nervous habit countless times over the past 8 months since the divorce proceedings began. The gentle questioning strategy was one Ms. Peterson had perfected over years of working with traumatized children, starting with comfortable topics before delving into more difficult territory. Sarah spoke animatedly about Princess Luna, her favorite character from the show, describing how the butterfly princess always fought for truth and justice, her small voice growing stronger as she talked about the episodes she watched with her mother during their special Saturday morning time together. Ms. Peterson nodded encouragingly while maintaining eye contact, her body language open and reassuring as she gradually steered the conversation towards Sarah's home life. The child advocate noticed how James Matthews shifted in his seat when Sarah mentioned their weekly viewing ritual, his expensive leather chair creaking slightly in the hushed courtroom. The testimony moved to discussions of school, where Sarah excelled in art and mathematics, just like her father had at her age. She described her best friend Emma and their shared love of drawing, especially the secret pictures they made during recess, and Peterson's gentle voice encouraged more details about these drawings, while Rebecca Matthews reached for her tissue box, understanding the significance of what was coming next. Sarah had always processed her feelings through art. Her kindergarten teacher had noted her unusual talent for capturing details in her sketches. As Sarah spoke about her two different bedrooms, one at Mommy's apartment and one at Daddy's mansion, her voice took on a slightly different tone that made Ms. Peterson lean forward imperceptibly. The child described her princess-themed room at her father's house with its canopy bed and crystal chandelier, but her hands kept returning to Miss Whiskers' ears, twisting them with increasing intensity when she mentioned how the ceiling would sometimes shake from the noise downstairs. Judge Wilson made a note on her legal pad while James Matthews' attorney quickly scribbled something and passed it to his client. The courtroom remained silent except for the scratch of the court reporter's stenotech machine capturing every word as Sarah continued her testimony, describing her weekend routine at her father's house. Wake up at 7 sharp, dress in the clothes laid out by Maria, the housekeeper. Breakfast at 7:30 sharp. No delays allowed. Homework review with Dad at 8 sharp. Everything precisely timed, exactly the way her father ran his business meetings. The rigidity of the schedule stood in stark contrast to her animated description of lazy Sunday mornings at her mother's apartment, where pancakes could happen at any time. Ms. Peterson skillfully wove through topics that seemed innocent on the surface but carried deeper significance. She asked about Sarah's favorite hiding spots during hide and seek games, leading to a detailed description of the various rooms in her father's mansion. Sarah mentioned how she once allowed to hide in the basement, even though she could hear music and voices coming from behind the heavy door at night, sometimes when she was supposed to be asleep. James Matthews coughed suddenly, causing his attorney to spill his water across their carefully arranged documents. The child advocate noticed how Sarah kept glancing at her mother whenever she mentioned the basement, her small fingers now practically knotted in Miss Whiskers' fur. Rebecca Matthews maintained her composure, though her knuckles had turned white from gripping the edge of her seat. Ms. Peterson asked about the games Sarah played at her father's house, leading to an unexpected revelation about a new game she had invented called Special Detective, inspired by her favorite Butterfly Princess episodes, who always collected evidence of wrongdoing. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop several degrees as Sarah innocently mentioned how she would pretend to be Princess Luna investigating mysteries in her father's house. James Matthews' previously impeccable posture stiffened, while his attorney stopped writing mid-sentence, his pen hovering above the legal pad. Sarah continued, unaware of the rising tension, describing how she would use her mother's old phone, the one she found in a box of things her father had meant to throw away, to record her detective adventures. Just like the princess did in episode 23, Judge Wilson noticed how both federal agents in the gallery had shifted forward slightly in their seats, their casual poses becoming more alert. Ms. Peterson maintained her gentle questioning rhythm even as she recognized the significance of what was unfolding before her. 15 years of child advocacy had taught her that sometimes the most devastating revelations came wrapped in the innocent language of childhood play. She watched as Sarah reached into Miss Whisker's carefully sewn back compartment, something no one in the courtroom had noticed before, her small fingers searching for something that would change the course of not just this custody hearing, but multiple federal investigations. Sarah spoke about her father's new mansion with its crystal chandeliers and marble fountains, her voice growing stronger as she described the endless rooms she was allowed to explore, except for one, the mysterious basement door with its shiny new locks and keypad that beeped in the night when she was supposed to be sleeping in her princess-themed bedroom directly above. Sometimes the beeping would wake her, and she'd hear muffled voices speaking in languages she didn't understand. Ms. Peterson noticed how the child gripped Miss Whiskers tighter as she moved deeper into her account, the worn teddy bear serving as both comfort object and as the court would soon discover something far more significant. The little girl described the changes she'd observed in her father's behavior over the past 6 months, how his weekend routine had shifted from their traditional daddy-daughter pancake breakfasts to urgent phone calls and hushed conversations in his study. She talked about the new security cameras that appeared throughout the house, especially the ones near the basement entrance, and how Maria, the housekeeper, was no longer allowed to clean that particular area of the house. Sarah remembered these details specifically because Maria had complained in Spanish, not knowing the child had been learning the language from her mother, who taught at the local high school. Rebecca Matthews watched her daughter speak, her heart breaking at the revelation of how much Sarah had observed and internalized during her weekend visits. The security measures Sarah described matched the suspicious changes she'd noted during custody exchanges, but had been unable to prove. James Matthews maintained his composed exterior, but his right hand had begun tapping an irregular rhythm on the defense table, something his attorney quickly attempted to still with a warning touch. The federal agents in the gallery maintained their casual poses, though their eyes never left the witness stand. Sarah continued her testimony, describing the strange parade of visitors who came to the house, always entering through the side door near the basement, never using the grand entrance with its sweeping staircase and glittering chandelier that her father had showcased in Architectural Digest just 3 months earlier. She noted how these visitors dressed differently from her father's usual business associates, wearing dark clothes and carrying metal briefcases instead of leather ones. Some had tattoos that peeked out from their collar and sleeves, designs that Sarah had secretly sketched in her princess notebook hidden beneath her canopy bed. The details that caught the child's attention proved remarkably specific. She mentioned how the keypad lock would flash green exactly 12 times before visitors were allowed inside, a detail that caused one of the federal agents to whisper urgently into his wrist microphone. Sarah spoke about the different sounds she heard through her bedroom floor, the counting of what she thought were game pieces, the shuffle of papers, and the distinctive click of metal that she'd later recognized from her uncle's hunting videos, her description growing more precise as Ms. Peterson gently guided her testimony. Judge Wilson leaned forward slightly as Sarah revealed how she'd started keeping track of the basement visitors in her princess diary, marking their arrivals with butterfly stickers, purple for the ones who spoke English, blue for the ones who spoke other languages, and gold for the ones who made her father nervous. She had learned about data collection in her second-grade science class and decided to apply it to her observations, never realizing the significance of her meticulous record-keeping. The judge noticed how James Matthews' complexion had grown increasingly pale as his daughter innocently detailed what amounted to a comprehensive surveillance log. The testimony took an unexpected turn as Sarah described the night she had followed Maria down to deliver coffee to the basement visitors, carefully timing her descent to match the housekeeper's footsteps. The child had positioned herself behind the large vase of weekly fresh flowers, her small frame hidden from view as the basement door opened briefly, allowing her a glimpse of what lay beyond. Her description of the room layout: computer screens covering one wall, stacks of counting machines, and rows of metal cabinets caused James Matthews to knock over his water glass, the sound sharp in the otherwise silent courtroom. Ms. Peterson maintained her gentle questioning approach, though her eyes met Judge Wilson's, briefly acknowledging the weight of what was unfolding. Sarah explained how she'd started using her mother's old phone to record the basement door whenever she heard the keypad beeping at night. Holding the device through the banister rails of the curved staircase, she had learned this technique from episode 15 of Butterfly Princess, where Princess Luna gathered evidence of the Shadow King's illegal crystal mining operation. The parallel between her favorite show and her real-life detective work, creating an innocent framework for what was becoming damning testimony. The courtroom temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Sarah innocently mentioned the strange game she played called Secret Detective, using her mother's old phone to record videos through the basement keyhole while her father hosted what he called business meetings. James Matthews' face transformed from confident to ashen, while his star attorney Jonathan Pierce knocked over his water pitcher, sending ice cubes skittering across the polished floor like diamonds catching the fluorescent lights. Sarah reached into Miss Whiskers' opening that had been carefully resewn in her small fingers, retrieving a phone that had captured far more than anyone could have anticipated. The gallery erupted in hushed whispers as Ms. Peterson carefully accepted the device from Sarah, handling it with gloved hands as per protocol, while the child explained how she'd learned to make hidden pockets watching a Butterfly Princess episode where the heroine concealed magical crystals inside her stuffed unicorn. The inspiration had led her to create a similar hiding spot in Miss Whiskers using her mother's sewing kit. The teddy bear had become not just her constant companion, but an unwitting accomplice in gathering evidence that would soon shock the entire courthouse. Rebecca Matthews stared at her daughter with a mixture of pride and horror, realizing that the old phone she'd been unable to find after the separation had become an instrumental tool in uncovering the truth. Sarah described how she'd activated the phone's camera whenever she heard the basement keypad beeping, keeping it charged using the Princess nightlight adapter beside her bed, the same nightlight her father had complained about, claiming it interfered with his state-of-the-art security system. Now the reason for his objection became crystal clear. Judge Wilson signaled to the court technology specialist, who approached the bench with a tablet capable of securely accessing the phone's contents. Sarah, continuing her testimony, explained how she'd figured out her father's basement door code by watching the reflection of the keypad in the decorative mirror across the hall. She remembered the numbers because they matched the date of the last time they'd had their special daddy-daughter day at the zoo. Before everything changed, her innocence in describing such calculated surveillance made the revelation all the more powerful. James Matthews attempted to maintain his composure, but the slight tremor in his manicured hands betrayed his rising panic as Sarah detailed how she'd connected the phone to her mother's laptop during their weekly Sunday visits, carefully uploading everything using the butterfly-themed flash drive she'd received for her birthday. The flash drive that currently sat in the evidence locker, its contents already reviewed by federal investigators who had been building their case for months. The child's unwitting assistance had provided them with the missing pieces they desperately needed. The prosecution team exchanged subtle glances as Sarah revealed how she'd organized her recordings using the same color coding system from her princess diary, creating folders named after different butterfly species to catalog the various types of meetings she'd documented through the basement keyhole. Her second-grade teacher, Miss Anderson, had taught them about classification systems using butterflies as an example, never imagining how her student would apply these organizational skills to gathering evidence of international criminal operations. Hans Peterson guided Sarah through a description of what she had observed during her secret detective sessions, the child recounting details about the counting machines she could see through the keyhole, the stacks of papers covered in numbers, and the wall of computer screens displaying graphs and figures that reminded her of her father's Bloomberg terminal in his study upstairs. Her description perfectly matched the Federal intelligence reports, but carried the unmistakable perspective of a child who thought she was playing an elaborate game inspired by her favorite cartoon character. The court reporter Marian Hayes' fingers flew across her stenotype machine, capturing every word as Sarah explained how she had learned to time her recordings around the housekeeper's schedule, knowing that Maria always brought coffee to the basement at exactly 9:15 p.m. during special business meetings, the same time the Butterfly Princess show would have been playing if she'd been at her mother's house. Instead, the child had turned her disappointed TV time into an opportunity for investigation, her testimony revealing a level of methodical observation that seemed beyond her years. Judge Wilson observed James Matthews as his daughter's testimony continued, noting how his attorney's increasingly urgent whispers were met with stony silence. The prominent real estate developer's carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of his own child's innocent yet damning testimony. Across the courtroom, Rebecca Matthews pressed her hands to her mouth, stifling a gasp as she began to fully comprehend the extent of her daughter's secret activities and the danger she had unknowingly placed herself in while playing her detective game. Sarah continued her story, describing men in expensive suits carrying metal briefcases and speaking in whispers. She recorded everything because the Butterfly Princess in her favorite show always said evidence helps catch bad guys. Her father lunged forward, suddenly causing Mr. Whiskers to fall from her grasp, the teddy bear landing face down as two federal agents emerged from their positions in the gallery, their badges glinting under the courthouse lights. The sudden movement caused several gasps from the spectators, while the court security officers moved swiftly to position themselves between James Matthews and the witness stand. The child seemed momentarily startled by her father's outburst, but maintained her composure in a way that reminded Judge Wilson of seasoned witnesses, her small hands folded in her lap, just as she had seen her mother do countless times during previous hearings. Sarah continued speaking, now describing how she had recognized one of the basement visitors as Mel Romano, her father's business partner, who'd been in the news recently. Something about missing money from city development projects. She had heard her mother crying about it on the phone late one night when she thought Sarah was asleep. Hans Peterson kept her voice steady as she guided Sarah through more detailed descriptions of the basement visitors, asking her to share what she remembered about their conversations. The child explained how she had learned to recognize different languages from her school's International Day celebration. She could tell when they spoke Russian because it sounded like what her friend Anastasia's grandfather used when he picked her up from school, and she recognized Mandarin from the parents of her math club friend David. The innocent way she catalogued these details made them all the more incriminating. The court technology specialist had begun displaying screenshots from Sarah's phone on the courtroom monitor, careful to show only the least sensitive images that had been cleared by federal investigators. The timestamps on the photos matched perfectly with known meetings of suspected crime syndicate members. James Matthews' lawyer, Jonathan Pierce, was frantically scrolling through documents on his tablet while simultaneously trying to signal his client to remain seated. The prominent real estate developer had begun to sweat visibly, his Italian silk tie now slightly askew. Rebecca Matthews watched the scene unfold with a mixture of terror and pride. Her daughter had somehow managed to document what teams of federal investigators had struggled to prove for months, all while thinking she was playing an elaborate game inspired by her favorite cartoon show. Across the courtroom, James Matthews had loosened his tie completely, his usual polished appearance crumbling as Sarah described how she had noticed the special papers they used in the basement had the same butterfly watermark as the documents she had once seen her father burning in his study fireplace late one night. The federal agents who'd been posing as courtroom spectators maintained their positions, but their attention had shifted notably to the emergency exits, as Sarah mentioned specific dates and times that corresponded perfectly with their ongoing investigation. The child recalled these details by connecting them to episodes of Butterfly Princess, explaining how she knew it was a Thursday, because that's when new episodes aired, and she had to miss her favorite show to stay at her father's house. The prosecution team exchanged knowing looks as each innocent detail added another layer to their case. Judge Wilson observed how the gallery had started to fill with more federal agents quietly entering and positioning themselves throughout the courtroom, while Sarah continued her testimony, describing how she'd seen her father using special machines to count paper that looked like money but had different colors and writing than what they used at the school book. Fair, her description of the specialized counting equipment matched surveillance photos that had been taken months later during a separate investigation. The coincidence was too precise to ignore. The courthouse security team had moved closer to the defense table as James Matthews' behavior became increasingly erratic, his attempts to maintain his businesslike demeanor crumbling with each new detail. His daughter shared Sarah seemed oblivious to the mounting tension as she explained how she'd learned to use the phone's slow-motion video feature to capture clear images through the basement keyhole, a trick she'd learned from episode 23 of Butterfly Princess, where Princess Luna had to gather evidence of the Shadow King's crystal smuggling operation. The parallel between her favorite show's plot and reality created an eerily perfect framework for her testimony. The evidence spilled forth like a broken dam. Sarah had hidden the phone inside Mr. Whiskers, downloading everything to her mother's laptop, the videos showing illegal gambling operations, money laundering, and drug transactions, all captured through the eyes of a child who thought she was playing detective. Rebecca Matthews stared at her daughter in shock, realizing her baby girl had been gathering evidence while she fought through endless custody hearings. The technological investigator now projected selected footage onto the courtroom screen, each clip meticulously labeled with Sarah's butterfly classification system: purple butterflies for money counting nights, blue ones for meetings with international visitors, and gold butterflies for what she called scary nights when voices got loud. Sarah explained her cataloging system with the same enthusiasm she used when describing her science fair project about actual butterflies. She'd learned about metadata in computer club at school and applied those principles to her secret detective work, adding notes about dates, times, and the different languages she heard through the basement door. Her organizational skills had unknowingly created a comprehensive surveillance database that federal investigators had spent months trying to compile. The child's innocent hobby had accomplished what dozens of undercover operations had failed to achieve. The court watched in stunned silence as Sarah demonstrated how she'd positioned her mother's old phone to capture the clearest images through the keyhole, using her stuffed unicorn's tail as a stabilizer, the same unicorn that currently sat in the evidence locker containing additional memory cards carefully hidden in its sparkly cone. The prosecution team had discovered this secondary cache of evidence just hours before the hearing, leading to the increased federal presence in the courtroom. Today, Sarah had created her hiding spots based on different episodes of Butterfly Princess, each one inspired by the show's creative solutions to gathering evidence against cartoon villains. James Matthews remained frozen in his seat as his daughter's videos played across the screen, showing shadowy figures entering his basement carrying briefcases that emerged significantly lighter than when they entered. Sarah had noticed this detail because it reminded her of Mary Poppins' magical bag, but in reverse. She explained these observations had prompted her to use her tablet's slow-motion feature to better document the differences. Her childlike curiosity resulting in crucial evidence about the flow of illegal funds through her father's business empire. The court reporter struggled to maintain her professional composure as the child's innocent commentary provided damning context to each piece of evidence. Rebecca Matthews listened as her daughter described the night she recorded what federal agents would later identify as a major international transaction. Sarah had been awakened by raised voices and the sound of her father pacing in his study above the basement. The child detailed how she'd carefully crept down the grand staircase timing her movements between the creaky steps she'd memorized during her previous detective sessions. Her description of the men arguing in the basement about missing numbers and incorrect accounts matched perfectly with the federal investigation into a multimillion-dollar discrepancy that had triggered the initial investigation. The technological evidence specialist continued displaying Sarah's recordings, each one clearly time-stamped and categorized according to a butterfly classification system. The child had created detailed notes using her princess diary, connecting events to episodes of her favorite show that helped her remember specific dates and times. When episode 24 of Butterfly Princess aired, she recorded the largest gathering of international visitors to date. When the season finale was broadcast, she captured footage of her father arguing with Ms. Romano about payment schedules. Her perfect memory for her favorite show had created an unimpeachable timeline of criminal activities. Through it all, Sarah maintained the innocent enthusiasm of a child sharing her favorite hobby, unaware of how her detective game had exposed a vast criminal network. Judge Wilson watched as the girl described learning to lip read by watching her father's basement meetings on mute, a skill she had developed after being caught once when the phone volume was too high. Her adaptability and quick thinking had transformed her into an unknowing expert witness whose testimony was simultaneously heartbreaking and astounding. Federal agents in the gallery had abandoned any pretense of casualness, now openly taking notes as Sarah revealed connection after connection that their months of investigation had failed to uncover. Chaos erupted as James Matthews vaulted over the defense table, making a desperate break for the side door, his expensive shoes slipping on the spilled water as federal agents tackled him to the ground, his cufflinks worth more than his ex-wife's monthly salary scattered across the floor like broken promises. While Sarah watched from the witness stand, her small voice cutting through the chaos, asking if she could pick up Mr. Whiskers, the courtroom exploded into motion as years of careful investigation culminated in this single dramatic moment. The polished facade of James Matthews, successful businessman and devoted father, shattering completely under the weight of his 7-year-old daughter's innocent testimony. Security officers rushed forward to assist the federal agents, while Rebecca Matthews instinctively moved toward her daughter, only to be held back by Nance Peterson, who maintained her protective stance beside Sarah. The child advocate had positioned herself between the witness stand and the unfolding chaos, her years of experience evident in her calm demeanor as she kept Sarah focused on Mr. Whiskers rather than the sight of her father being handcuffed on the courtroom floor, his Italian suit now wrinkled and stained from the spilled water that had proved his unexpected undoing. Judge Wilson rang her gavel repeatedly, the sharp sound cutting through the commotion as additional federal agents emerged from their positions in the gallery, their weapons visible but not drawn. James Matthews continued to struggle, his previous composure completely abandoned as he shouted about betrayal and set up, his voice cracking with desperation, while his attorney Jonathan Pierce stood frozen, his leather briefcase fallen open, spilling documents across the floor, several pages bearing the same butterfly watermark Sarah had described in her testimony, creating an ironic echo of her classification system. The court reporter Marian Hayes' fingers never stopped moving, recording every sound and exclamation for the official record. Her professional demeanor maintained even as the scene before her resembled something from a high-stakes crime drama rather than a family court proceeding. Nearby, the technical investigator hurriedly secured the evidence laptop containing Sarah's videos as James Matthews' wide gestures threatened to send it crashing to the ground, the screen still displaying footage from the basement meetings that had sealed his fate. Rebecca Matthews watched in horror as her ex-husband, the man whose business acumen and charm had once captivated both the social and financial worlds of this city, trashed against the federal agents, his resistance futile as reinforcements poured in through every courtroom entrance. Sarah remained surprisingly calm on the witness stand, her attention focused on retrieving Mr. Whiskers from where had fallen during the initial chaos. The teddy bear that had served as both her comfort object and unwitting accomplice in exposing an international criminal enterprise lay just beyond her reach. The gallery had erupted into frenzied whispers as reporters scribbled frantically in their notebooks. Susan Chen from the City Tribune, already typing on her phone her earlier stories about financial irregularities in Matthews Morrison development, now proving to be merely the tip of an iceberg that a 7-year-old girl had unknowingly mapped in its entirety through her princess-themed detective game. Court security struggled to maintain order as more curious courthouse staff pressed against the doors, drawn by the commotion within. James Matthews continued his desperate struggles, now alternating between threats and pleas, his eyes fixed on his daughter as he realized the full impact of her testimony. Part of him seemed unable to comprehend that his carefully constructed criminal empire had been dismantled not by sophisticated federal investigation, but by a child playing detective with her mother's discarded phone and a stuffed bear. Judge Wilson observed the scene with measured calm, having witnessed similar breakdowns throughout her career, though never one precipitated by such unprecedented circumstances. The federal agents efficiently secured James Matthews, while evidence teams moved in to collect the scattered documents that had spilled during his attempted escape. Sarah, finally breaking her focus on Mr. Whiskers, looked at her father with a mixture of confusion and sadness, asking in her clear child voice why he was playing rough in the courtroom when he always said proper people should behave properly. Her innocent question carrying enough weight to still his struggles momentarily, the irony of his daughter's internalized lessons about proper behavior contrasting sharply with his own actions. Judge Wilson not only awarded full custody to Sarah's mother, but also ensured the evidence was transferred to federal authorities. Mr. Matthews' empire collapsed that day, brought down not by sophisticated investigation, but by the pure, honest testimony of his 7-year-old daughter, who simply wanted to protect her mother. The aftermath of the hearing sent shockwaves through the city as federal agents moved simultaneously on multiple locations connected to Matthews Morrison development, seizing documents and hard drives that corroborated every detail of Sarah's innocent observations. The judge had taken the unusual step of addressing Sarah directly after issuing her ruling, praising the child's bravery while ensuring she understood none of what had happened was her fault. Rebecca Matthews held her daughter close as Judge Wilson explained that sometimes doing the right thing, like Princess Luna would do, could have big consequences, but that Sarah had helped make the world a little bit safer, just like her favorite cartoon character. Federal Victim Services had already begun coordinating with child psychologists to help Sarah process the events, ensuring her detective game wouldn't leave lasting trauma. Sarah clutched Mr. Whiskers, now safely returned to her arms, as her mother led her from the courtroom through a private exit arranged by courthouse security. The teddy bear that had served as an unwitting secret agent would be retired from detective work, but would remain her constant companion through the healing process ahead. Rebecca Matthews listened as her daughter chatted about wanting to become a real detective someday, just like the Butterfly Princess, though perhaps without the hidden phones and basement keyholes. The natural resilience of childhood already helping Sarah frame the experience through the lens of her favorite show. Meanwhile, in the main courtroom, federal prosecutors worked rapidly to process James Matthews, who had finally stopped struggling, his designer suit disheveled and his carefully maintained image in ruins. His attorney, Jonathan Pierce, had already begun negotiations, hoping to leverage the extensive evidence Sarah had unknowingly gathered into a plea deal that might salvage some fragment of his client's future. The irony that his best hope now lay in the very evidence his daughter had collected was not lost on anyone present in the courtroom. The story exploded across media channels within hours, reaching national news networks. By evening, Sarah's Butterfly classification system became a topic of discussion among law enforcement agencies, impressed by the thoroughness of her inadvertent surveillance operation. Federal investigators admitted that her innocent categorization of basement visitors had provided them with a clearer picture of the criminal organization than months of traditional surveillance had achieved. Her simple purple, blue, and gold Butterfly system perfectly tracking the flow of money, goods, and high-level meetings. Judge Wilson completed her final case notes while reflecting on how 30 years on the bench had never prepared her for a day quite like this one, where a child's game had unraveled an international criminal enterprise. The butterfly-themed flash drive containing Sarah's evidence had already been transferred to a secure federal facility, its contents providing the foundation for what prosecutors predicted would be one of the most significant organized crime cases of the decade. The judge added a special notation recommending Sarah for a civilian commendation, though the ceremony would need to wait until the criminal proceedings had concluded.